Okay, so I think some of you may have come to our previous sessions, but just to get started, I wanted to say that I want to acknowledge the land of the Darug people where I'm coming to you from tonight, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and really grateful to be in this beautiful part of Sydney in New South Wales. So welcome to you guys and thanks for coming along. If you haven't met me before, I work as the NDIS support manager at Fighting Chance. And what we're really trying to do with this education series is make more sense of the NDIS, because I have seen the system before the NDIS and have seen the amazing opportunities and huge potential that can come from the NDIS, but it can only be great if it makes sense. And so much of the NDIS is confusing and doesn't make sense from the outset. So the way that I do these sessions is really casually. I've got slides prepared that you guys will be sent, but it's very much a conversation, and I'd love for you guys to pop any questions in the chat or even take yourself off mute if you have questions. I'll try and answer them. But tonight is all about things to think about when you're thinking about post-school transition. So hopefully it's going to get you just to think about some things you may not have thought of, or things to consider that you haven't quite finished thinking about, because it's such a huge leap for people. So that's where we're heading. So off we go. So I guess, you know, some of you may have been in the NDIS for a long time. Maybe you're brand new to the NDIS. But I guess the thing to say about this idea of individualized funding and flexible funding is that not everyone yet fully uses that to its full potential around having bigger expectations. So for those of you who may have been part of the pre-NDIS system, wherever you are in Australia, it was very, very limiting, and there were very, very small categories of support potential. So the system before the NDIS really forced everybody to think small, because there were not great things that you could expect. It was very much small service type options. But even though the NDIS has been around now for quite some time, I still think we need to remind each other about thinking bigger and raising our expectations of what we can expect from the system and from our community and the funding. So I just wanted to flag this paper for you guys in case you've never seen it before. And it's something that we can attach with the slides when we send them out to you. Back in 2014, the Independent Advisory Council, or the IAC, wrote a paper. So the IAC is the highest voice that the board of the National Disability Insurance Agency listens to. So you may remember last year when independent assessments were chucked out, the IAC had a massive role to play in that. So the board of the NDIA really looks to and listens to the IAC. They are a board of people with lived experience of disability. So whether they are an NDIS participant themselves or a sibling or a parent, so the IAC is a really strong voice, and they wrote this paper called Reasonable and Necessary Support Across the Lifespan. And what they did back in 2014 was introduce us all to this term ordinary life. So what they were saying is, before the NDIS, people were striving for service attainment. They were striving for program entry. And what they're saying now with flexible individualized funding is that we can now look towards a life that's more than service attainment. And really the paper is trying to get people to think, well, what do I want my ordinary life to be? And so there was a little bit of discussion around, well, why ordinary and not extraordinary? And it's really because ordinary is are the things that people without a disability will often take for granted. So stuff I want to do after school, work, where do I want to live? Do I want to travel? So it's a really great paper that could get you thinking about what could an ordinary life look like. So we'll make sure we share that with you, but just keep that in mind when we think about the next few slides. Also, people feel pressure to know what they want to do after school. But I like this quote because it says, I do not always know what I want, but I do know what I don't want. So part of this process of planning for post-school transition It's not only about what you might want to do, it's also thinking about the things that you don't want to do. So the person you're supporting might be very clear around, I do not want to do A, B, or C. And that's really important and really helpful thinking, as well as thinking about what you do want to do, because it can come with a bit of pressure. So I really just wanted you guys to think about all of the things that post-school might mean. So a lot of the conversation within high school and with, support teachers, the learning support teachers, all of the things in the media about post-school often focuses on work, school leaver employment supports, supported employment, disability employment supports, day programs, recreation, but it doesn't talk enough about all of the other things that need to be considered after school. So I just wanted you guys to think about covering off these areas and these domains when you're thinking about post-school goals. So is it skill building? What support do you need inside the home, but also what support do you need to get out of the home and access the community? Therapies, employment, volunteering, home and living. So some people already want to have goals around working towards moving out of home. Relationships, friendships. So many people have a loss of structure in relationships and friendships when school finishes. So these points are then to make us go, hang on, do I then need to make sure I create opportunities for them to either continue or for there to be new opportunities when the school structure finishes? What about travel training and transport, driving, further study, and personal care, and all of the meal supports, all of the things that the person needs to be able to do these activities. So one thing that we are going to be speaking about in next month's session, I believe, is around responsibility of funding when considering the NDIS versus other mainstream buckets of government money. So one example that I've just popped there is around study and education, and when is it TAFE's responsibility to support me, or when is it the NDIS's responsibility? So that's something we're going to tackle next month. So the other thing to think about is when the year 12 school year ends for your child, or for you, if you're a participant on here tonight, there are some high schools that finish at the end of term 3 in year 12. There are some that go all the way up to the week before Christmas. And that's actually very significant when you're looking at funding. So if someone is finishing year 12 in October, and then they're thinking about their post-school program starting in January, February, the year after, have you considered requesting funding for that 4-month period? And thinking about, well, do I even want there to be a break? Do I want a Christmas holiday break? Or is that school? I'm done with school. Do I actually want to get straight into stuff? So really think about, when is the end of school and when is the start of post-school? For some people, they want the 6-week break. Other people, they want to do it the week after school finishes. They want to get straight into post-school life. So really think about that, because that then will impact the funding you request for post-school, and it might start the Monday after school finishes when you need funded support. The other thing is, when you're thinking about joining NDIS service providers and services for after school, make sure that you spend that time before school finishes to try them out if they allow it. So go and visit, go through the intake process, and get yourself on waiting list if you already know you want to join those places, and try them out. Some places offer trial days, even without there being funding required. The other thing is, if you know where you want to go post-school, and if it's an NDIS funded support, it can be really great to ask those services if they're willing to provide a quote and also a service description for your child's planning meeting before school finishes, because then that can form evidence working towards getting the funding in the plan for that service. So, those quotes will be things like, what category of funding is required? What support ratio do they recommend for your child? So all of these things are building up evidence, and even better if they've done a trial day, because then it's an even more valid quote around knowing the person and the support ratio that they require. The other thing is that at the moment, the length of an NDIS plan has a default plan length of 2 years now. And one way to negotiate for a shorter plan period, if that's what you want to do, is to bring up that you may be about to go through a very significant transition period. So many people who are finishing year 12 or finishing high school use that as evidence to negotiate and to self-advocate for a shorter plan period. Because if someone's finishing year 12, who knows what they want to do in 18 months' time? So because there's so much change in this transition period, it's often a really great idea to consider requesting a shorter plan, so a 12-month plan, because so much will happen, so much will change, and maybe in 12 months, the goals will change, the support needs will change, and they want to try something else. So that's a really valid way to negotiate shorter than the default of 2-year plans. Anyone got any questions so far? Put it in the chat or come off mute if you like. No, not yet. All right. So the other things that you guys need to think about is some programs will require very specific documentation before intake can occur to their post-school program. So there are some programs who will require there to be, for example, a behaviour support plan if it's a specialist program that supports people with behaviours of concern or behaviour support plans. You can't access that program unless you have a current behaviour support plan. So we do hear of people who, come up on the top of the waiting list, they've got the funding, but they don't have the paperwork, so they can't start. So if you are aware of where you or your child would like to attend, make sure you check with them what specific care plans or documentation is required so that there's more of a seamless transition into them. And consider also, does the person need an advocate coming out of high school? Are there any potential areas of conflict or, difficult decisions where the person needs a representative? It's something else to consider. The other thing is if the person is wanting to access an NDIS service provider, say as a day program or a recreation program, it's really important to ask the service if they provide transport and if they will facilitate picking the person up and dropping them home, or if that's something that you need to plan separately. The other thing to really think about as post-school, when you're going to the planning meeting to prepare the funding and the plan for post-school, is this idea of general transport. So general transport is the new version of what used to be called the mobility allowance through Centrelink. So general transport has 3 different levels, and they have some pretty specific eligibility around things like participating in recreation, day programs, and work. So if we just have a look then, for example, at level 1, the NDIS will provide up to $1,606 per year for participants who are not working, studying, or attending day programs, but are seeking to enhance their community access. So what happens is the majority of the time, general transport is paid across 26 fortnightly payments into someone's nominated bank account. So level 2 is that bit more funding, and it's for participants who are currently working or studying part-time up to 15 hours a week, participating in day programs, and for other social, recreational, or leisure activities. Level 3 is then a bit more, so then that fortnightly payment is a bit more. And level 3 is a bit stricter in that you need to be currently working, looking for work, or studying at least 15 hours a week, and you have to be able to prove that you are unable to use public transport because of your disability. So general transport does have cases of being paid into plans for people who are not yet 18. We have seen cases of it, but it's something that's much more likely to be part of the conversation for post-school NDIS participants. What I'll also say about general transport is that I have never, ever, in 6 years of working in the NDIS, I've never had an assessor bring this topic up in a planning meeting. So my advice to you is that you get to know general transport, get to know the different levels, have a think about where you might be sitting or where your child might be sitting in regards to level 1, level 2, or level 3, and then advocate with this language at your planning meeting, because the interesting thing about general transport is there are obviously criteria that you can see on the screen about becoming eligible for level 1, 2, or 3. But once you are eligible and it then gets paid into your nominated bank account, you don't actually have to use it for transport. The NDIS is not going to check your personal bank account. So some people actually see this as a really important part of their income that subsidizes their life and helps them with costs of living. However, some people do use it strictly for transport, and they'll use it to top up their Opal card or have it connected to the bank account that pays for taxis or Ubers and things like that. We have something in the chat. Oh, Susan's saying, what can general transport be used for? Oh, there you go. So Susan, you know, officially it's great if people do have requirements around paying for transport, it can help to subsidize that. So then it feels more like you're paying for your taxis and your Uber through NDIS funding rather than out of your own pocket. However, if you do have it paid into your bank account and you do have, you know, some tricky costs in your life, you can actually use it for something other than transport because it won't be checked because it's in your personal bank account. Karen is saying, I was told by an LAC today that the participant I was supporting wasn't eligible for general transport, even though there was very limited public transport available in his area. She told me that it was the government's responsibility to fix that problem. So it shouldn't be related to whether there was a lot or limited public transport. It should be related to these 3 criteria. There is what we're talking about in next month's Zoom meeting is around the legislation and looking at funding responsibilities. There are conversations around NDIS versus transport, but if the person could see themselves against level 1, 2, or 3, then it's not actually around limited public transport or not. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I'd be frustrated too, Karen. So in those situations, you can get super geeky like me and actually share the website link with the person if it's not going to get them offside, and just say, oh, sorry, I don't really understand what you mean. I've looked at the levels and I can really see that the person is eligible based on level 2, you know, really use the language of the NDIS website to, you know, have the language around justifying eligibility. And it's a safety issue. Then it might be something that you can use as evidence to request it to be varied, Karen. So Tess is asking, is there any additional evidence required to advocate for this funding? If you've got a really strict assessor, they may want evidence that the person cannot use public transport because of their disability if they're considering level 3. But really it's a conversation around knowing and using the language of these 3 levels. I have had assessors try and say that you need to be able to show that you're unable to use public transport because of your disability for level 2. But again, if that happens, bring up the website and the link's there for you when you get the slides. That's only related to level 3. So the advice is to always just go back to the NDIS website and use their language in a conversation with them about their own website. So again, the message here is that you'll 90% likely have to be the person that raises general transport in the conversation, because it's really very rare for this to be brought up by an assessor, even though your child might be very, very eligible. Catherine is saying, is this only for school leavers or year 12 participants? So we have seen cases, Catherine, of people under the age of 18 receiving general transport funding, but my gut feeling on the ground is that it's really going to be much more successful to have a conversation around this once you're a school leaver and you know, not then having the opportunity for school-based transport support. So it's really more for adults, I would say, but a lot of people leaving school will be 17 turning 18.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
So with regards to the transport, is anyone on the NDIS are they available for that funding? So if my son is starting TAFE next year and he wants to take public transport, is he entitled to the level 1 or level 2? Sorry.
I would definitely be having the conversation around level 2, because it sounds like he's someone who is studying part-time and yeah, is requesting the support around his transport needs. Yeah, I would be having a conversation around level 2, Karen.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. I've had many students get transport funding if they are doing a school-based traineeship. Oh, okay, that's good, Karen. That's great to know. So it sounds like those are people who can access the eligibility around studying, I guess, around the traineeship. So that's great to know. So we get super geeky about goals and legislation in next month's Zoom, but I just want to bring us back to goals and remembering that when you're doing goals for post-school, remember that we want to keep them broad because you want to try and have as many opportunities for funding to be attached to the goal statement as possible. So, for example, one that I often use as a goal example, one that's too narrow is I would like to learn how to use cutlery independently. So that's a valid goal, but it's so narrow. There's hardly any opportunities to attach funding to that. So then that person might say instead, I would like to learn how to use cutlery independently so that I can independently feed myself at a restaurant so I can go out to dinner with my friends and be more part of my community. Long-winded. A third option could be, I would like to reduce my social isolation and increase my independence in the community. And then that's a really broad statement where you can then discuss in your assessment, what does that mean? Well, I'd like to be able to use cutlery independently. I want to increase my fine motor skills. I want to be able to access the community by travel training. So, you know, when you have a broad goal statement, you can have more opportunities for funding to be attached. Make sure the goals are outcome focused so you can actually then measure at the end of the plan period. Have we attained the goal, partially attained, or is it no longer relevant, or does it need to continue because we haven't quite got there? Try and connect the goals to an ordinary life, that the document you'll be sent by the IAC, really about life as a bigger picture and not being about therapy attainment or service attainment or funding attainment. Those things can help to lead to what you want your life to look like. And like I said earlier, consider a 12-month plan and consider having that conversation with the assessor. And I will say that the conversations around plan length are often sound non-negotiable. So the assessor will often say, we're doing 2-year plans now, and it makes it sound like there's no alternatives, but there absolutely are alternatives. We know that people can get 12-month plans and also 3-year plans sometimes. And a really valid reason for a shorter plan period is a big stage of transition and change, including post-school. So this is what we're going to be looking at next month, really looking at the reasonable and necessary criteria, which are part of the NDIS legislation, which are critical to understand when building evidence for requesting funding. But I just tonight want to focus on one of them. So the NDIS Act of 2013, Section 34 is the reasonable and necessary criteria. These are the 6, I mean, this is very summarized, but these are the 6 points that the NDIA planners must be satisfied have been addressed before they will fund something in someone's plan. So the one I want you to look at here is the 5th one. So the language is, the funding or provision of the support takes into account what is reasonable to expect of families, carers, informal networks, and the community to provide. So I'm bringing this one to attention tonight because my assumption is that there are many parents, carers, guardians, and informal supports here. And what can happen at this transition at post-school is that your role can also shift and change, and it's a good time for you to think about, yeah, what is reasonable to expect of me at the moment? So this is where you then have to think about what's an ordinary life for you. So what is still reasonable to expect of you and what isn't? And you actually have the right to discuss this and raise this. Some people do it in a carer impact statement, but this is linked to one of the 6 criteria in the legislation. So when a planner is deciding what funding will go into someone's plan, they must consider what is reasonable to expect of informal supports and what isn't. And a really great way for that to become clear is for you to state what is and is not reasonable to expect of you. And so something that you may have done all through high school, all through primary school, all of a sudden may not feel appropriate or reasonable anymore. Or maybe your child is wanting someone else to play that role. So this is a really important time for you to think about, hang on, what does an ordinary life look for me as well? Because you've got possibly employment, possibly other children, possibly other caring roles, your own social and health and well-being needs. And also, these are all things that can impact on your capacity and what you might determine is reasonable or not in your caring role.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So can I use that as an example? So now I'm working 6 days a week and my son is leaving school. Obviously I used to be his mentor in some ways, but now he's 18, he's an adult and he's looking outside for other mentors, which I cannot provide myself. So I'm hoping that the NDIS will do that for me. So additional funds for a mentor for my son.
Mm-hmm. So it would, I know what you mean by mentor, but an NDIS assessor might need it to be more an NDIS speak. So I guess specifically, what things are you wanting to have replaced by someone else? Like, so is it skill building? Is it travel training? Is it prompting with activities of daily living? So think about what it is in regards to what a support worker might do or a therapist might do.
Social and community participation.
Yeah. So that's really helpful, because that then makes sense to the assessor, because that's then related to support categories, funding requirements. So if we say things like mentor, I know what you mean, but they're going to say the NDIS doesn't fund mentoring because it's not in the price guide, right?
Yeah.
So we need to speak NDIS. So we need to spoon feed these assessors in their own language. So they understand how to then fund it. So if it is things like accessing the community, facilitating social participation, absolutely you have the right to say it's no longer reasonable to expect that of you. And I would relate it to you, but I'd also relate it to your son, who has said, I actually would like this to be with someone else, and relate it to why. So is it that you want to sustain your mother-son relationship? Is it causing concerns around your relationship? There are some parents who'll say that if certain roles are to continue, it would lead to potential for relationship strain or breakdown. So absolutely, Karen, that's really important for you to bring up. And I would use the language of the NDIS documentation to do it. So I'm going to show you that on the next slide. But before I do that, Susan has asked, you are saying that you would chat to the assessor, but do you always get to talk to them? If you're having your funding reassessed, Susan, and you're having a planning meeting, then, and if your child is happy for you to be at their planning meeting, then yes, you will be able to speak to them either on a phone meeting, a video call. They're using Microsoft Teams. And I think some people are actually doing some face-to-face somewhere around the country these days.
Yeah, okay, because I guess I'm just thinking in the last couple of plan reviews, I think I've had the support coordinator to help, and then we've just put in the review.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I've had any contact with the actual planners. I certainly did earlier on in 4 or 5 years ago, but sort of more recently, I don't think I did. In fact, but then I did put in for a review of one, and then the assessor rang me. But is it always the case that you will get to talk to the assessor?
It's not always the case. So I guess if your child is under the age of 18, then you would be listed as their, parental responsibility kind of, you'd be listed as the parental nominee.
Yes.
So
which I still am, even though he's just turned 18. I'm still the nominee.
Okay. Also, you've continued. So you've had to go through the process of being maintaining the nominee status. Okay. Yeah. So in that case, you should then always be informed about meetings, changes, things like that. So it then is up to you and your child about who attends the planning meeting. And the support coordinator attending is actually up to you guys.
Right.
They need to be invited. They are coordinating supports, they're facilitating a lot of things, but they are a funded support. So them being there is actually also billable time to the child's plan. So it should be that if they're there, it's because you've asked them to be there.
Right.
And if you and your child want to be there, then absolutely that's what the priority should be.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
No worries. So I just wanted to show you some geeky language, especially Karen, it sounds like you're keen to do a statement for the next planning meeting. So this is some language that comes from the NDIS rules, which is like the cousin of the NDIS legislation or the sibling. So what this part here does is it gives you some really good language around, well, how do I explain what's reasonable to expect of me and what isn't? Because remember, making a statement about what is and is not reasonable to expect of you as an informal support or carer might have a really big impact on the funding requirements of your child. So that's why it's really important that you guys understand this part of the criteria, because it can influence then what funding is being requested. If you've been doing a certain task or a certain support for free and there's been no funding required, and now you're saying it's no longer reasonable to expect that, and the support is still required, then that's when it becomes a conversation about requesting funding for that thing. So the NDIS rules give some really good language, and we're going to dive into the NDIS rules in next month's Zoom as well. But I've just pulled out the section around carer and reasonable support from a carer. So for example, they're saying in deciding whether, when we're looking and taking into account what is reasonable to expect of families and carers, the NDIS must consider what is normal to expect of a parent of a child. So this is where they talk about what is regular parental responsibility and what's over and above regular parental responsibility. So for example, if a 4-year-old child requires one person to assist them in the bath, then that's going to be considered parental responsibility, because a child without a disability who's 4 also needs assistance from one person in a bath, right? But then as the person gets older, the conversation then becomes around what support is required over and above a child of the same age who does not have a disability. And that's where it can be really helpful to get evidence from therapists and things like that. So then this is where part 2 comes in. Whether because of the child's disability, the child's care needs are substantially greater than those of children of a similar age. If there is an extent to the risk of the well-being of the participant's family, and whether the funding or provision of the support for a family would improve the child's capacity or future capacity. That's for a child, but if you are supporting 18-year-olds and plus, they would be considered in part B, so other participants. But they're still asking questions around the extent of any risk to the well-being of the participant arising from a reliance on their family members, and also the suitability of family members and the community to provide the supports, such as the age and the capacity of the family members, the intensity and the type of the support that's required, and the extent of any risk to the long-term well-being of the family members or carers. So you very much have the right to raise these things if they're relevant to you in a carer impact statement. And if you do, I strongly suggest that you directly reference and quote the NDIS rules. Pretend it's like a uni assignment. You don't have to fluff around with changing the sentences. Directly quote the NDIS rules, and we're going to go over that next month. But it really is adding a justification for what you're stating is reasonable or not for you. Any questions about the rules or carer impact statements so far? Because that can really impact funding that's being asked for.
Lisa, I'm a transition coordinator at a specialist school for students with autism.
Oh.
And I find that parents who are still required to shower and give personal care to their young people who have turned 18 can use these rules, because, you know, it's sometimes not reasonable for a father to be providing that personal care for a daughter or vice versa, or even, you know, as the parents are getting a little bit older, And we've had, good success in carer statements, getting funding for people to come in and help with those personal care needs for their.
Amazing. And have you had
Plus.
those parents reference the rules?
Yep.
Oh, good on you. That's amazing to hear. That's really great. But again, these are the sorts of things that in an assessment, the assessor is not going to say, hey, I'll just get out the NDIS rules and just show you your rights around what you can say to me is reasonable or not. They're not going to do that. So this is why we have to keep talking about this together when you're not in an assessment, so that you know what your rights are, so you can prepare to justify and self-advocate for these things, so that when you arrive at the assessments, you're fully empowered around how to say what is and is not reasonable. Just like Karen said, they've had success from parents doing this, because it's not about saying my son or daughter does not require the support anymore. It's saying they still require it. It's just not reasonable to expect it of me. Yeah, Karen?
And they're quite shocked when the parent, brings this up, or I bring it up in a meeting, because they don't expect parents or people in schools to know these things. So you're much more empowered if you know the language, as you're saying, Lisa.
That makes me so happy, Karen, because a friend and I, a good friend of mine who's an NDIS participant, we joke that from the musical Hamilton, there's a line where one of them sings, "Why do you assume that you're the smartest in the room?" And our dream is that every participant and parent and carer can sit there and say, why do you assume that you're the smartest in the room, to the assessor? And then they whip out their legislation and their rules, and they've got all the language they need to feel empowered. So that's so good, Karen. Susan is asking, should we write a separate carer impact statement, or is that part of the application? No, it's a separate statement that you do. You don't need a template. You can genuinely just write a statement around your role, your responsibilities, and also state very clearly what is and is not reasonable to expect of you. So back onto post-school life. So we've thought about your identity. We've thought about all the things that you need to think about for the child. But I guess it's really important to think about, school has actually provided structure for 5 days a week, not just for the student, but also you guys. So you've not required funding for 5 days a week from 8:30 to 3:30 or whatever it is. So you now need to think about that space and how that might need to now be filled and where funding might be required. So think about all of the things that school has held the responsibility for. So learning, health and well-being, sometimes exercise, friendships, relationships, group-based social opportunities, some therapies in-house, some assessments in-house, some travel and transport. So all of these things, if they are still required ongoing, you'll need to create your own adventure now and actually create a new structure from zero. So school is a place where it's all being provided in the one spot, and a lot of the time the school has generated that structure and routine. So now we need to look at that open space and go, hang on, we need to build it from zero, which might feel a bit overwhelming, but it can also be a really great way to go, actually, yeah, what do we want this to look like? So is it that you want to think about social programs, day programs, skill building, group, one-on-one? Don't forget weekends and evenings, holidays, and not just necessities. It's also fun and adventure and going out. It really depends on each individual, but you first have to think a bit bigger, because a lot of these things weren't available at school. So the other thing is having to think about support ratios when you're thinking about post-school support for programs that are NDIS funded. So it's not just about saying, well, I want to go out one-to-one. You'll often need to have evidence that one-to-one is required, because don't forget, these assessors have got budget KPIs, and one-to-one's a lot more expensive in someone's plan than 1-to-3. So these are the things we need to think about. The other thing I need you guys to think about is thinking about the person's week and their routine and their structure. Don't only think about NDIS services. Think about all the other ways that goals can be met, like mainstream. So TAFE, education, health, mental health, all of the things that already exist from other government buckets of money. And also think of community options. So for example, if someone has a goal to do cooking skills, a lot of us will think, is there an NDIS program that does cooking skills? But what about a community college on a Tuesday afternoon in my local neighborhood? And maybe I do need to take an NDIS funded support worker with me, but then I'm doing something that is part of my local neighborhood and community, and I might meet might meet more people in my community. I still might need funded support to attend, but there's a big difference from attending a community college with support to attending an NDIS service. So think about your goals and if they can be met from options other than just the NDIS service, and make sure that you're considering all those options. So the reason we think about this is because of this model of these circles of support that was described by Judith Snow. And so she just gets us to think about these 4 different circles around a person. So that circle of intimacy are the people in your life who know all of your intimate information, very close friends, very close family members or a partner. Then we have the circle of friendship. So you might go out to dinner with them, but they may not know the most intimate details of your life. Circle of participation might be people in your workplace or people in the sporting team with you. They may not know much about you though. And then the circle of exchange, circle 4, are the people in your life because they're paid to be there. So this might be your dentist, might be your hairdresser, your mechanic, but it also for NDIS participants are all of their NDIS funded supports. And what's really important to consider around connecting people to support options after school is trying to create opportunities where the person can have some opportunities for relationships to become circles 3, 2, and 1, which is why if someone goes to, a community college for the cooking school, it might mean that they get to know people in the community more than if they went to a service provider, as one example. The other thing about relying too heavily on the circle of exchange and relying on your relationships coming from funded support is that funding is never guaranteed from one plan to the next. So that's why when we're looking at solutions and options for post-school routine and structure, think about informal, so the free support, neighbors, friends, family, siblings, community, so things in your community like churches, volunteer groups, men's shed, surf clubs, things like that. Mainstream, the other government buckets of money, TAFE, mental health, things like that. Those first 3 solutions there on the screen really don't rely on NDIS funding. So then they're a bit less risky because if they're funded, you never know if that funding is going to be the same in the next plan. So I've just got something in the chat. Are we able to request support to look after our son so we parents can have a holiday without our son coming along? We are unable to leave him home alone overnight. Oh, that's a big one, Susan. I've
always wondered about this.
So officially, if it was presented like that, you'd probably get a response around, and I'm going to be really honest with you, the response would probably be around, well, that's about you as a carer wanting respite. And then they would probably say the NDIS is about funded support for your son. It's not funding for a carer. That's the blunt black and white response. So that's why families get really creative and they'll say, we would like our son would love the opportunity to do some skill building and work towards his long-term goal of moving out of home. And we really want to try and build his confidence in spending some time away from us as his primary supports. So when we're away, we want our son to have the opportunity to do some independent skill building, some, activities of daily living, with trying to learn how to do that without us being the only people that prompt it. So then it's about our son. It's about our son building capacity. It's about our son building towards another future transition around a different home and living, situation. Then it's about your son and his skills and his independence and his capacity building. And that's when you would ask then for there to be short-term accommodation funding, possibly for your son, and then trying to get the funding for a support worker, but it needs to be based around your son. And then if that's funded, of course, you can then go away, right? So it's the way you go about it and the way you express it. So just keep thinking about NDIS funding is attached to your son, not you. So if he then gets the funding for those things, you will then have the opportunity for respite because he's being fully supported, and then you can go away. Does that make sense, Susan?
Yes, yeah, it does. Thanks.
Okay. It is a bit of a game, the NDIS language.
Yeah.
So look, I've just got a couple of goals on this slide and the next slide around different language. Just I'm obviously very long-winded with my talking, but these are just some examples of trying to make sure your goal statements are broad and offer lots of opportunities to attach funding to, and don't make them too narrow. So an example, I would like to receive formal support to build my confidence and independence to access and navigate my community so that I can try new things and make new friends. So that first goal, you go, okay, maybe this person wants travel training. They might need some physiotherapy and OT around their mobility to access the community safely. They also want to make new friends, so maybe they need some communication support here around expressing themselves with new people and confidence. So just sort of think about a broad goal and trying to capture all of the funding opportunities within that. Same as the first one here is way too narrow. So I would like to learn how to use an Uber or taxi on my own. Great. It's a valid goal. I would never steal that goal from that person. That's their goal. However, it's too narrow. Remember, you've only got space on your plan for 2 short-term goals. So we need to try and cover off a whole bunch of stuff in those 2 statements. So they might then do the second version of, I would like to learn how to use an Uber or taxi on my own so that I can build my independence to access my community, try new activities, make new friends, and build my independence and confidence to do things separate to my family. Very long-winded, but way more opportunities for funding there. Or you could say, I'd like the necessary support to build my confidence and independence to access my community and build my peer network. So look, they're all valid and they're all potentially very true to the person. It's just that the first one is way too narrow. So just keep that in mind for post-school goals. Tess has said, you mentioned 2 short-term goals. Are there also long-term goals? If so, how many should there be? So Tess, according to what everyone says on the ground, you'll never see it written anywhere, but we're told that you can only fit 2 short-term goals. And my definition of a short-term goal is one that you're wanting to work towards achieving within this planned period. And then you're allowed to have 4 to 5 medium to long-term goals. So yeah, that's what we're told. Joanne, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Are the reports that they are expecting for post-school goals different to what we're required to provide for, you know, our current plans, because it's such a huge change? Are they expecting, you know, more in-depth or detailed reports from therapists or from school or anything?
There's a good chance that because you've got so much space now to fill and a whole new routine to create, and the plans are going to most likely be higher funded because you're now replacing 5 days of school, there may be the requirement for there to be more evidence of the goals are going to be different. So if there's skill building or if there's social community access, like there may be the need for more goal evidence around that. And this is a good time to consider, if you have funding for it, an occupational therapy, functional assessment or functional capacity assessment, because they are really comprehensive assessments of someone's entire life and all of the functional domains, and then recommendations for support across the whole functional domains of someone's life. So that can be a piece of evidence that can cover off a whole bunch of like skills, core support, capacity building, you know, assistive technology, skill development. So yeah, I would say that that's probably a good idea to think about getting one of those. And also I think that's why I don't know what they call them, different schools call them different things, but the independent skill ISP, is it? Independent skills plan? Oh, I'll come off mute, one of the support teachers.
Oh, the IEP.
Yeah, they can often be really helpful evidence too, because they they are written in a way that focus towards post-school goals as well. But yeah, you may, because the goals might be capturing a whole new world of support needs and things the person's working towards, then you're going to need to also back those up with evidence.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, you also might be, you know, living and working with someone who has an employment goal. So this is where we do have conversations around things like school leaver employment supports. We will look at, you know, responsibility next month around NDIS versus employment services. But if someone does have a goal to be supported to work towards transitioning into open employment within 2 years of leaving school, this is where there should be a conversation around SLES, the school leaver employment supports. SLES is not for everyone. But if you are living and supporting someone who does have a goal to transition into open employment within 2 years of leaving high school, then SLES is a really good thing to consider, because it's a block of funding for 12 months that often funds 3 days a week of employment support. So more ideas around work is some people might be ready to transition into open employment or might choose supported employment. So an Australian disability enterprise. So that's where someone has the modified wage, subsidized wage, volunteering, self-employment, work experience. And then there are some pretty cool stories coming out of NDIS participants who are entering the world of micro enterprise. So I've popped a couple of links there for you guys to look at that. So that's when someone really is supported to start their own small business and learn about work through their own journey as a small business owner. So that can be really cool to look at too. So just coming back to that idea of a medium to long-term goal, it can be really great to have them in the plan because it can show what the short-term goals are working towards. So for example, I would like to learn how to increase my independence with activities of daily living in my home so that I can increase my skills and confidence as I work towards moving out of home before I turn 25. This is obviously made up by me, but if there's a clear medium to long-term goal, that can often help with the funding of the short-term goals because they are seen as steps towards that longer-term transition. So you've got space for 4 to 5 medium to long-term goals, so I would pop them in if you have them. So just to keep us thinking about, post-school is not just about employment and supported community access Monday to Friday. It's not just about SLES and day programs. So think about all of the things that will make up an ordinary life, not just for your child, but also for you. So remember, what's your new life going to look like being the parent or carer of a non-school child? And don't forget that some new things might come up in these assessments and new goals that have never been looked at before, and new services that you may not have heard of before. So, for example, there's an amazing service in Sydney called Relationships and Private Stuff, and that's a specialist counselling service all around intimacy and relationships and safe relationships. And all of these things may not have been thought about back in Year 9, but all of a sudden you're starting to learn about these new specialised services. And if that's the case, get the service descriptions, get the quotes, and get them to help with building the case for funding. So nighttime social goals, weekends, and also don't forget rest. So that's also allowed. Okay, I've got a comment. I've been told that a participant can't access DES and SLES at the same time. Our dilemma is that my daughter has just started a part-time job that a DES provider organised. I'm imagining that she'll be able to work part-time next year, but there is still opportunity for skill development, life skills. Okay. So if someone has been assessed as eligible for DES or disability employment services, that's through the Centrelink assessment system. That's not actually NDIS funded. But if your daughter still has support needs and goals around employment, there's still ways of going about that's not SLES. So that they're in core support, there's a support item called supports in employment. So there's still ways of having funding attached to employment goals, even if it's not DES. I'm sorry, even if it's not SLES, school leaver employment support. So that might be something to consider, Catherine. And you can still absolutely bring up goals around life skills, skill development, and it not be through employment funding as well. So you'll probably need to get a bit of detail about what the DES will provide. And then if your daughter requires over and above what they can provide, that can help with looking at where the NDIS might have a responsibility. But it's something we'd need to dive into in much more detail than tonight, because there are SLES guidelines. At the end, I might try and see if I can find those guidelines and pop them in the chat, Catherine. So maybe stick around and remind me in 2 minutes. Okay. So the other thing I want to say is that there are some ways to keep up to date about things that change. So we have the links here for the NDIS newsletter. We're going to try and keep writing things on the Fighting Chance NDIS newsletter, including a blog about post-school. I also work at DSC, so Disability Services Consulting, and we have a free newsletter that translates all things NDIS. Make sure you understand your rights about participant check-ins, plan variations, and plan reassessments. So that was last month's Zoom that we did, and that's on our website. You can go back and watch the recording and stay up to date with legislation changes, because that can impact things like plan reassessments and plan variations, things like that. And the other thing is to remember that information is power, like Karen explained earlier, around those parents who are talking the talk and getting outcomes. So come next month and get super geeky with me about the legislation and the rules and know how to talk the language of the decision makers, because it can be extremely empowering to know how to try and justify and negotiate for the right funding in your plan. Is there a place where local post-school options are listed so we can see what services are available in our area? I would probably try and find the school teacher transition for your area, Katrinsa, or I would probably, because I'm not sure where you are in Australia, but find out who your partner in the community is. So where the local area coordinator service comes out of in your area. So in my area, it's Uniting, for example, and then ask them to help with that because they'll know your local area. I will probably start with trying to find your partner in the community, or maybe your child was assessed by a local area coordinator, so you know where they're from. I'll go to them and ask first. Okay, we are through the slides. We made it with 2 minutes to spare. I'll see if you guys have any questions. Otherwise, I will try and find the SLES document for Catherine, but I'll wait to see if there's any questions first. If not, go enjoy your evening.
Thanks, Lisa.
No
Thank
worries.
you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, that was great.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. I'll leave the slide. No, I'll actually stop sharing the slides. You're going to be sent them, and I'll just hang about for a bit and see if I can find that document for you guys about SLES for Catherine. Otherwise, yeah, thanks guys for coming, and see you next month. I'll just keep Googling things while you guys are still there.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Bye. Sorry you can hear me typing.
Thank you.
There we go. I think I found it already. Okay, so Catherine, I have one link from the NDIS website, but it's more about being a provider. So I'm going to keep searching. Here we go. Okay, so the link I've just popped in there for you has links for providers who are interested in delivering school leaver employment supports. But what we really need to find is the operational guideline for you. So, are you still there?
I am. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to try and find that for you. So I just can't see you right now because I'm typing. So,
Yeah, I'm definitely here. I've unmuted myself.
okay, awesome. Oh no, it's not letting me find. Oh, here we go. No, provide a handbook. No, okay. I'm just wondering then if I share the slide with you about, so depending on how geeky you want to get with me, Catherine, this is the NDIS pricing arrangements and price limits document, which defines SLES. So do you want me to pop
Yes, yeah, that'd be good.
because they're really saying that it's a capacity building support, and they're saying that it's to create a pathway to employment. And I guess they might argue that your daughter's already had a successful pathway into employment.
Yeah.
But it's not to say though that she can still have employment goals. Like, you know, my first job was working in an ice cream shop. Your daughter should not be told, well, there you go, you've made it now, you're employed, that's no longer relevant. She absolutely has the right to continue to want to change her employment and look at different opportunities and build her skills in that. So it might not be that it's SLES, because they're saying here, with appropriate supports, it is expected that the majority of SLES participants will transition to the DES pathway. And so I guess she's already shown that she can be supported by the DES pathway, which in my experience is a lot less support than SLES.
Yes, and that's my concern, because even though she's already achieved employment, you know, there's so many skills that are still probably needing to be developed while she's in the workplace. And, you know, even just all the planning and organising and travelling and budgeting and all the things that come when you actually enter the workforce.
Oh, that's absolutely available for her as goals. So those things are not impacted by the fact that she has SLES. She's still allowed to have goals around independent community access and independent public transport travel. She absolutely can talk about skill development, and it can even be requesting supports that impact her employment. So confidence in communicating and expressive communication in the workplace. No, they're absolutely not at risk because she's already employed. She absolutely can still request support around those goals, even though it's related to employment. Because remember, well, actually, we're doing this next month, but and
maybe I'm preempting a few things too.
No, I'm just, since you're here, I'm going to show you the legislation. Here's a sneak preview to next month. So decisions around funding is based on these criteria. And part B is that the supports that your daughter has funded must be shown to facilitate her social and economic participation. So that is going to be the kicker for you, having people, when they recommend funded support for her, relating it back to how those funded supports will facilitate her economic participation, including maintaining her employment.
Yeah,
so,
but then is it DES's responsibility to maintain her employment?
Oh, that's where we're going to need to look at DES guidelines and
and see, I had a provider say to me, and see, because two different providers have explained it differently, I'm just not sure if it's their sales pitch to try and get me to sign up with their organisation. But one said, well, technically DES can be used to support the employer and SLES can be used to support the employee. And I'm just like, oh, you know, I don't want to do anything dodgy. I'm just not interested.
Oh, look, I'd have a read. I've put a lot of links in there for you. So have a look at the SLES provider handbook.
Yeah.
Have a look at the pricing arrangements on page 83 for that definition.
Yeah.
And then put in the legislation. So go to section.
Yeah, I've copied all those links.
So section 34 of the NDIS Act is relating to social and economic participation. If the person requires support around economic participation because of their disability, that's when we can bring in NDIS responsibility, but that's what we'll look at next month.
Yeah, okay, no, that's excellent. And so because we've joined this Zoom, then we will automatically be included in the next dates and information and everything, or?
Do you know Alex, my colleagues here? Do you know Alex? Oh, maybe, I'm not sure if she's at
Yeah,
HE
that's
or not.
okay.
No, if I were you, I would actually, let me do it now. Go to the Fighting Chance website. No, I think you should register for it separately.
Okay, yeah, because I actually found out about this through a friend who I just noticed is in the group too. So it was in her newsletter. That's how we found out about it tonight. So
okay, yeah, let me just, I'm just going to put this link in the chat now.
okay.
And so I believe, it's got tonight in there. Yeah, so it's got, you can register for Tuesday, the 18th of October already. And I'm just going to put the link in the chat.
Okay.
Now.
Lovely.
There we go.
Okay.
Makes me look tech savvy, but I'm not.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, so come along and we'll get stuck into the geeky legislation because that's going to help you with your language around justifying stuff.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, thanks very
All
much.
right,
That was
thanks
great.
everyone.
Okay,
I will close the meeting now and stop recording, and thanks all for being here. All right. End the meeting. Bye.